welcome everybody to the Media Roundtable Industry Edition. You know what we do here. We dive deep into the secrets of the craft for those of you that dare be responsible for pursuing the bounties of the podcast industry, or maybe it's audio, radio, streaming, creator-based video. We call it audio, and we call you the chief audio officer because you are responsible for the success of these programs, and it's not easy to do. We're here to help you lighten the load. We're going to unpack some things and really look at the industry, not just from what's interesting about the business of podcasting, but what does it matter to the people that pay for the whole thing. So we're glad that you're here. I'm your host, Dan Granger. I'm the CEO of Oxford Road, and I'm also the CEO of Veritone One. We are bringing these two brands together, and people ask me all the time, when are you guys going to merge? And I say, I'm not telling, because I may or may not know that answer at this point in time. Also, what are you going to call this thing? And I'm like, I don't know. What do you think we should call it? But I think I'm going to announce it right now. I think it's time to rip the Band-Aid off. I'm thinking Oxfordtone. Do you guys like that?
It broke up a little there.
Oh, it's a work in progress.
Okay.
But send us your thoughts, info@mediaroundtable.com. I'm joined by a very special cast of people today. Of course, we have Spencer Semonson. Spencer is media supervisor at Oxford Road. Welcome, Spencer. What do you think we should call the company?
Spencer Road.
I like it. Sold, approved for now. We also have Stu Redwine. He has a podcast called Ad Infinitum, and he's really into audio creative. And Stu, we welcome you to the program. Thank you for being here. What should we call the company?
I'll plan on keep on coming back. Oxford One. Oxford One.
Interesting. A little on the nose, but something to consider. Something to consider. Okay. We have Ricardo Martinez, who we get out here once in a blue moon. He comes and he unveils his thoughts, and then and when he's done, he leaves and he comes back when he wants to. But we're always grateful when he's here. He's vice president of client services at Oxford Road and a grizzled veteran. And since apparently everybody watches podcasts on YouTube, you can see he's got pride because he's wearing the Oxford Road shirt. And we're glad to have you here with us, Ricardo. Oh, what? Can you hold that a little closer? You got blurred out.
I mean, I've got my water bottle with Oxford Road's logo.
That's a nice water bottle.
My coffee Yeti, like indispensable.
I love that so much. I'm drinking out of the Oxford Road coffee cup right now, which is very fancy. Ricardo, what should we call the company, do you think?
First off, thank you for having me. And I would go with a very simple O.
Oh.
Oh.
Oh. Oh.
It delights.
Surprises. I like it. I'm delighted as you say it. I think we've got a lead horse right now, potentially, of the four suggested so far. But we brought in a true wizard to come in and bring a lot of thoughts to the table. I haven't gotten to be on the podcast in several months with this individual. He's been busy. But we have James Cridland when he's not pontificating, publishing Podnews Daily or the Podcast Business Journal or giving a keynote at some, gallivanting around the globe. He is beating people to a pulp on social media because of his clearly defined views on the future of podcasting and video. Oh, James, we're so grateful that you stepped into the ring here today.
It's great to be here. It's great to be here.
James, you know what I'm going to ask you.
Yeah.
What do we do? What do we do?
I put Oxford One into the chat because that's the obvious, isn't it? So obviously I'm going to have to go for Veritone Road.
Oh, Veritone Road. There it is.
No, please don't go with that.
That'll stay on the consideration set.
Just flip it, James. One Oxford Road. You could also go with one Oxford Road. Just do the mirror image.
Yeah, or just one.
People
Oxford.
think there's two.
One Oxford.
So we have to
one Oxford.
Yeah.
But there's still Spencer Road to be considered.
I like Spencer Road, but I think Ricardo really brought the thunder today. I mean, why not O?
Oh.
Yeah. Because then it would be the same as that company that is based in London that is just called Listen, which you need to explain. Oh, the podcast production company Listen, because it's got such a complicated name. So yeah, I'm not so sure about O.
It's very
Mind
much
you,
in the eye of the
it may also
beholder.
be a double entendre to some people, so it may be problematic. I don't know, but it does surprise.
Oh,
How about uh-oh?
That's what the competition is saying. I will tell you that. Uh-oh, that's what they call us. I don't know if you guys heard about this, but there's a lot happening in the true crime business, and I thought, Spencer, maybe you should fill us in with some of these honorable mentions here. What's going on with true crime?
Yeah, we have an honorable mention. Let me hit you with some sweet, sweet facts from Edison.
Mm-hmm.
All right. True crime has gone up. It was previously at number 5. It's now at number 4. It is only behind news, comedy, and society and culture. And that is a big deal because those are always going to build ever present, especially post podcast election. They are, better on a one-to-one basis, which is part of the advent of video. And it is still a mainstay in the podcast landscape versus a trend as shown through year after year. It's continually building. It makes sense a lot, though, that true crime would build as it's mirrored pretty closely with the 24-hour news cycle. And it's also a very intimate and personal format that has risen substantially during the pandemic as like a niche topic, similar to the advent of TikTok and Postmates even. So that is still something that you should have on your media plans even into 2025.
But Spencer, what if I don't want to be associated with violence and death and mean people and all the horror in the world?
Today,
I want shelter from this cruel, cruel world.
You want to be sheltered? Yeah. Well, I think people just have an obvious need to know the gory details about things. And I've read multiple articles recently about the psychological toll that true crime can take on a person. I still really don't understand those who can fall asleep to My Favorite Murder or a true crime obsessed. That's far from my psychological profile. But for some people, it makes them feel better about the things that are out there in the world. They can either think about the ways that they can prepare for it, or they can at least understand it to a better degree, and it makes them feel more safe in and of themselves. So though it is something unsettling, over time, advertisers are continually finding that it works for their benefit. And one of the reasons that it's growing is because the advertisers find high performance, especially for shows that have a high, female skew audience. Plus, many seeker scored shows in the true crime genre have high civility, even if they mark things like suicide or murder, et cetera, et cetera. So you're not going to put your dollars behind something that's actually actively hurting society, just reporting on its ills.
Interesting. And Spencer, do you or does anybody here with us know what the impact is on a brand?
To be in true crime?
Yes. What happens when you have those associations?
For the most part, they've been pretty good associations. If you look at, say, any of the shows under Audio Chuck creates some of the bigger shows. It's one of the biggest employer in Indiana itself, where it is headquartered. And it also is uncovering unsolved murders. So really, it's mostly good PR. You get to be in a venture that's growing local economy. And for the most part, it's grassroots endeavors that lend to a more intimate audience. So overall, I've seen nothing but positive attributes for doing
talk
so.
about edge of your seat listening, right? Like you lean in, you're so excited about the developing story. That's exactly what you want when like your brand is being talked about as well. Like that audience is already leaning in. They're going to be more receptive to your content.
Surely this is a self-selecting thing, though, because if you are one of those people that recoils from horror and recoils from, stories of murder and everything else, you're not going to be listening to these things anyway, and so therefore you'll never know whether your favorite brand is advertising next to them. I'm always sort of slightly confused about why advertising on a true crime show is supposed to be bad for a brand, because at the end of the day, this is all self-selecting. If you do not want to listen to true crime, you do not have to press the play button, surely.
Well, first of all, I want to listen to a true crime show that is voiced by you, James. I think you would be a master of this, or at least a clone of your voice. And this is one of the things we were able to talk to Ashley Flowers about, because the work of true crime is so often, I think, pigeonholed as just being exploitative. And truly, a lot of this, to me, she's the new John Walsh. This is very much also about bringing justice to the world, and I think that's that's doing good through the realm of entertainment. But yeah, it's always, I think it always gives people pause, and I think they have a challenge with it. But it's interesting because I like to look at some of these lanes that we create for ourselves that we think we're coming up with for the first time. But it's like, what were soap operas really about? What are those stories? What's happening there? And if you went to Barnes and Noble, where they still have them, or previously when we used to go to Borders or whatever, what were the sections in the store that people gravitate towards? These are not going anywhere. People want what they want. They're going to get what they're used to getting in some form or fashion. But we sometimes we don't look around us to the precedent to see what the market has already instructed us, so that we can orient ourselves rather than trying to pretend like this is the first time humans have ever come into contact
Right.
with this type of content.
No, and I mean it was huge. Radio dramas that were this kind of content was massive up until like rock and roll basically took away the radio drama. But I was just listening to an Imaginary Worlds where they were talking about this very thing of, like you're saying, this isn't our first rodeo. It feels like it's our first rodeo, but there's definitely precedent for people listening to shows about crime and audio and then hearing a ad for Lipton soup, which
Yeah.
was a big advertiser back then.
Well, I was on the freeway the other day, and it slowed down to a stop because something was going on the other side of the freeway, which had nothing to do with us. But the human's desire and impulse to rubberneck as well. It's just, you're not gonna
How did
condition
he
that
die?
away from. Yeah, exactly.
But how did he die?
There's an Onion headline with it. Anyway, that's a good round on that topic. James, sounds like there's some stuff going on with like people going to websites after they hear audio ads. What's this about?
Yeah, so this is some new data from Veritonic, who release what they call November 2024's podcast study, which is a 3-page PDF. It's a nice PDF. It's got 3 numbers in it, and it's got some data in it. And I think it's a very astute way of getting the most out of the data that you have. In this particular case, it's the power of podcast ads. And they are saying that people who listen to podcasts, hey, surprise, take action after hearing a podcast ad. Visiting a brand's website, 57% of people who take action visit a brand's website. 28% say that they make a purchase, and 29% say that they are likely to purchase a product after hearing a podcast ad. So good news, everybody. Podcast advertising works, which is a good thing.
That's a good thing.
You.
Well, I'm going to give you guys a sneak preview since you're either with me here today or you're listening. Oxford Road is working on a new case study that actually is going to share a little bit of proprietary data about a consumer's propensity to search for the brand when the ad is heard, because we have these strange contraptions to try to measure this stuff. And sometimes they're reliable, sometimes they're not. I want to see the study that comes out that says what percentage of people follow the instructions that are given in the ads, where they,
Correct.
do a couple of cartwheels and roundhouses and pirouette, and then they type in a promo code that's spelled just so with the right capitalization. It's like, that I think the people that actually, we've looked at it, and I think the people that actually will go to a vanity URL as instructed, even if they're going to purchase, is like 3% in some cases. It is disgustingly low. But it's nice to know that there is life beyond what is directly attributable.
Yeah,
So
it's
there's something
great
to that.
data. The other little thing in here, which Stuart might like, is that 26% of listeners apparently prefer host read ads, but 32% are drawn to jingles. So
Yay!
jingles, the future,
Stuart likes
the
that.
future is
Yeah.
jingles. Oxford won. There you go.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes, that
There you
was
go.
good. Yay. People like music. I hear people like music. Yeah.
it helps with the branding. It
That's
helps
what
make the brand go in the brain.
it seems like
Uh,
it puts the brand
it
in the
puts
brain.
puts the brand in the brain. So, all right, let's talk about while we have you talking, James. I don't know if you have any opinions or thoughts on this subject, but it sounds like there was a gathering
Oh, here we go.
not too far away from here in sunny Southern California that brought you out. Not that you stopped by while you were in town, but we heard you were here, and we heard that there was some big happenings at Spotify. Can you report any of that to us?
Yeah, so Spotify changed the name of Spotify for podcasters to Spotify for creators, launching all kinds of new and exciting things. Yes, it was a big day in the Arts District. Essentially, it means that eligible creators in the US, the UK, Canada, and Australia have a brand new Spotify partner program to join, which earns money from both podcast audio ads, but also from early next year, revenue based not on video ads, but on how much your video podcast is streamed by premium users. So the video will appear uninterrupted, ad free for those users. Daniel Ek came on stage and said some very nasty things about advertising and how people don't really like advertising and how advertising stops you from saying what you really feel and all of that. And so all of this coming next year, we don't really have much of the data around exactly how much they're going to pay out and everything else. But nevertheless, that was the big announcement that Spotify came out with a couple of weeks ago, and they certainly splashed the cash in order to end up doing that. There was a fantastic day in the Spotify offices, wandering around their new studios and everything else. That was all the smart thing, I think.
So I don't particularly mind if we spend the rest of the episode talking about this because there's like several meaty conversations to be had around this. Just one at the beginning is that Spotify's way of trying to kill the word podcast in favor of creator? What happens to live reads in the premium environment? What happens to all the advertisers that are not beneficiaries? And does that dramatically change the qualitative profile of that audience, at least based on income, if you're only serving ads to those that don't pay subscription? There are a lot of questions. So, in terms of what does this mean, like, James, what's your point of view on what this means? And we can round robin it too if anybody's got anything.
Well, I mean, firstly, Brian Barletta has written a very good article around what it means for podcasters. And he points out, firstly, if you upload a video podcast to Spotify, then that essentially replaces the audio totally. And it replaces the RSS feed. It replaces your ability to sell programmatic advertising. It replaces all of the benefits that you get from open RSS. All of that goes away because you've uploaded a video podcast onto Spotify and it uses the audio from that track as the audio as somebody is playing it back. So that's one easy way that Spotify has essentially got rid of all of the programmatic advertising from that particular show. Secondly, we don't quite know, he says, what the numbers are going to be. As I mentioned before, there are qualifications, and those qualifications are actually significantly higher than YouTube's, which is just worthwhile knowing. So if you're not making money from YouTube yet, you certainly won't be making money out of Spotify. And then thirdly, Brian says, we have no idea if a creator will make more from a share of the consumption of their podcast on Spotify Premium than from the dynamic and streaming ad revenue, which is currently available to them today. We actually don't know. And we don't know how it compares against YouTube. We don't know how it compares against pretty well anything else because the actual detail has yet to be released from Spotify on this. So a lot of it is pretty unknown, but you do get people who want to make a name for themselves on LinkedIn and places like that, posting and saying, "Oh, Spotify is going to be the future of just as they said that Samsung podcasts were going to be the future of podcasting, or other platforms. Oh, Spotify, I've got it. Spotify is going to be the future. Both Spotify and YouTube, it's all video, and that's where we go. Max Cutler, for example, posting a long post recently on LinkedIn saying exactly that, and a number of other people saying that as well. And from my point of view as a journalist, okay, there are lots of different views. From my point of view as a human being who has been involved in podcasting for 20 years, I just think this is crazy. Dan, I just think this is crazy. If YouTube and Spotify end up leading podcasting, end up doing the majority of podcast plays, then this entire industry gone. Because we don't have programmatic ads. Everything is run by people that frankly don't care about podcasting. Podcasting's what, 5% of YouTube, if that? So they don't care really. It increases all of our costs as creators because we have to deal with video. We give all of our editorial control to all Americans are very nice, but we're giving all of our editorial control to the entire global podcast industry, to two sets of people, Spotify and YouTube, and that's it. And it just, for me, it's like being on the Titanic, and somebody saying, "Oh, look, that iceberg looks nice. Let's go over there. Let's drive into that. And what's the worst that could go on?" And we're all sitting there and going, "Yay, iceberg, yay!" And I'm just sitting there going, "Surely this is a bad move for where we're going in terms of the future of podcasting, which is an audio-first medium, to firstly dive into video, and to secondly cede all of the control that we have, get rid of all of this programmatic advertising. No point for large ad agencies, because they won't be able to sell all of the advertising that they actually have into podcasting, because Spotify and YouTube work in a different way. All of this stuff goes away, and I don't understand why, as an industry, we're not sitting there and going, "This is a bad thing. We should be stopping talking about this."
Yeah, I mean, it's just a juggernaut. I just feel like YouTube is a juggernaut, and it's similar to I like the Titanic metaphor. I was trying to think of something like that, of just like, I mean, it's moving around the deck chairs on the Titanic. Like, we're going to call it this, we're going to do it this way. It's like, still, we're not dealing with the core issue, which is there's this massive force, and just renaming things or shuffling things around isn't going to change that. But I don't have the solution, but I think you're spot on in that it doesn't seem like the right strategy to actually affect the change that we see coming.
And I want to get more thoughts on this, but just to clarify one point, does anybody know what becomes of the live reads for a premium subscriber? Do those stay in the picture?
On video, yeah.
Yeah, if it's baked in, it's baked in, and it will remain in there. Yeah, absolutely. But it's all of the programmatic stuff that podcasting is founded on. All of that goes away.
I think for me, to brute force it is definitely not the way to go for the entire industry. Tom Webster recently said on the webinar about video that they are not enemies. They should work in conjunction with one another, and they will build up the industry together. So the minute that you decide to, rob Peter to pay Paul, it's going to be an issue for the entire industry. What I will say, though, as somebody who buys simulcast and has to almost buy the audio separate than the video, it can be potentially very difficult when you have an extremely high ad load in the audio, but not the video, to police both at the same time. And it does wear down on the listener experience, which degrades our ads. And video has never been the savior of the lower ad load. It's just something that helps us eventually get to the amount of impressions that we need to, and ensures a smaller amount of ads. So in that way, I do appreciate that they're trying to make the listener experience more palatable. They're also getting rid of static images for the ad read, which is something that YouTube allows, which will keep us from paying for impressions that are ultimately worthless on a simulcast ad. Do I think, though, that video is the clear way and needs to replace audio? No. Again, they need to work in conjunction with one another. If you're more video producing based and you back into audio, you should be more video. If it makes more sense on audio, video is not the way to go. So it's a big change for everybody when only a certain percent makes sense to do it.
James, I see you've got some more data to bring to the table, but I can't process it fast enough in real time. Through
well,
the chat.
so Chris Balfe said something very interesting on Peter Kafka's podcast, which is called Channels, which Vox Media does. So Chris works for Red Seat Ventures, which, and I will quote, helps stars find audiences and make money via podcasts and YouTube. He says 70% of viewers of his content on YouTube find it because of the algorithm. And as Kafka then said, that's an algorithm that brought them there today, but might not bring them there tomorrow. I mean, if we are relying on an algorithm like YouTube to pull new audiences into shows, what we hope, I think, what the industry hopes is that people find a show on video, but then actually consume it on audio, on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify in terms of audio or whatever it might end up being. But that's quite a hope, isn't it?
It's this topic is interesting because, usually I'd be throwing out a bunch of opinions right now, but I'm seeing multiple sides of it. But to your point though, James, one of the interesting things on YouTube, we've promoted this show on YouTube, and we might put this episode up. Like, let's be honest, we have an actual legitimate following for the show. It is small, but it is consistent and it is measurable. We put it on YouTube and we get like nothing unless we promote it or unless something happens to get passed around. So you'll see some episodes that have like 15 views. And then I've got other clips that are at like 20,000 when we were doing a little promotion. Now, guess what? Of the 100,000 views from unique YouTube users that actually stuck long term, it's like it never happened. So I think that kind of supports the easy come, easy go argument, in that if I'm an advertiser and I'm I'm chasing view count and treating that equal with an impression that will drive a predictable result, I think over time, what will be revealed is that the value of those are significantly lower. On the other hand, where I'm not sure I agree with you, James, is, look, we do programmatic, we have programmatic specialists. It's a necessary part of the business. And if it works, I'm happy about it. However, do I think that that's necessarily a great thing for the industry long term? Maybe not, because you already have people pushing the envelope on ad load, 17 units an hour. You've seen our pod load report. And so I do have concerns about the dilution that's taking place. And if they're able to limit it to what I see as the golden goose of the channel, which is these baked in endorsements, in that regard, it could be valuable. I'll let you respond to that. And I got one more thought on this topic.
Yeah, I can certainly see from the advertising side. I mean, you know way more about the advertising side than me. I mean, I just guess it's everything else in there. It essentially changes our industry so dramatically to give all of the control to two sets of people, two algorithms, instead of the way that we have done things in the past, which has been very much more open and very much. I mean, I did some data work the other day looking at podcast downloads, and there are 192 podcast apps out there. I mean, that's an incredible number and very helpful to allow people to find content that they otherwise wouldn't. And it just does worry me that we are walking blindfolded, essentially, into a world that we don't fully understand what the ramifications are, but it makes a significant change for what the podcast industry actually is.
Truly, I think it becomes almost an existential question about what are we, right? And that's where I think I definitely line up with your concern, is that the idea, I think the assumption that most people make who have the authority to influence it, they make an assumption that says that the absence of video is a bug, not a feature in this channel. And I would argue that it is actually a feature most of the time, and that the fact that you can double dip and add a video component for those that are so inclined is an additional benefit, but that doesn't mean it should be the rule. I mean, I will say that if you're trying to track with this conversation, you're just a listener right now, okay? If you're watching us on a screen, you may be really distracted by the beautiful thank you card that Spencer is using as a background, or you might be looking at the gorgeous view of the Los Angeles skyline behind me, but you may not actually be tracking as closely with what I am saying. Furthermore, for everybody that has used these channels historically to have something to be your companion while you are in motion, doing things where your eyes are needed elsewhere, you've now limited the ability to have that feature. And now you're basically saying, well, if it's not valuable, you have to stay stationary. And the piece that I pulled out of what's been reported was that Spotify may not even take your video if you have a static image. They almost require that there's activity, thereby forecasting to the consumer that you're missing out if your eyes are not on this thing, which I guess is fine if you're selling a visual product that requires it, but you've lost the plot when it comes to the intimacy that is the secret weapon of this channel, the power of this channel for a creator, for an advertiser, for a consumer. It's all the same. It's the fact that it is grounded in a conversation that is more intimate than almost anything you're going to do. You just can't replace it. And sometimes adding more sensory experiences actually can, effectively take your eye off the ball. So I agree with you. It is fundamentally shifting what it means. However, where I think that this could play out in a really interesting way, whether or not this works through the P&L of Spotify and YouTube, time will bear that out. And I could see a scenario where selling premium subscriptions is always a better ROI for the creator than selling towards something that is further from the reason that somebody came to listen or to watch, right? But I also think they are inadvertently creating a market opportunity for somebody. Not that Apple's ever going to care, apparently, but there is a window for somebody to say we're okay with sound. We actually like it, and we're gonna own that. And as somebody that is literally invested 2 decades and and their whole life's work through this company to double down on the primacy of this experience at its core, I would say they might be missing a trick here. But it's an interesting feature, it's an interesting experiment, and we'll be able to stick and move around it. But I think they're going to be sacrificing something they don't appreciate that should be left sacred. So we'll see if that way makes that a moot point. Time will tell. Any other final thoughts on this one, guys?
Well, and maybe the audio only slice is a certain size, and then audio plus video is a different size. I mean, I'm with you on it. It's like there's going to be somebody to serve that. The theater's still here, for crying out loud, live theater, but it's the size that it is. But that's okay. There's winners and there's losers and there's opportunity. So I'm sure audio only will absolutely stick around.
I wonder also whether or not this works for certain types of shows and doesn't work for other certain types of shows. It's very easy to make this show into video because we're sitting in front of cameras anyway.
Right.
And it's a straightforward thing. If you were to make Serial, the original Serial, into video, well, you would be making what other people call a documentary. That's hard to do. And so I wonder whether what this does is it contracts the type of material that you can make as a podcast, because actually making Talking Heads podcasts is far easier in video than making anything else.
Totally agree. I mean, if we're building toward the future where we all have robots that work for us and do all the physical things, and we never need to operate a vehicle or do anything with our eyes because we're just plugged into an imaginary reality, then this makes tons of sense because people are stationary, right? But while we're still out in the world living and doing things, there is a market for sound-based product in entertainment. And it's interesting to see such a big player pass on that. Any last thoughts on the last topic within that nested there that I don't think we really got to? And I think it's a long-term conversation, is this podcasters versus creators thing. You know, it's hard to even know how to identify ourselves, to be honest with this.
John McDermott from Canaraga Shark Media wrote something interesting on LinkedIn that basically said it's time for podcasting to go away and we should be talking about shows. And I found that interesting, given that actually this week is the first is the anniversary of the first podcast that came from Australia 20 years ago this week. And the first thing that they talked about this show, of course, it was called Good Day World, because of course it was.
This makes sense.
The first topic that they talked about is, this
Kangaroos.
podcast name. This podcast name isn't very good, is it? What else should we be calling it? And that was 20 years ago, and we're still doing that right now. But yeah, maybe it's an end to the world, to the word podcast, and the word show is now a thing. But again, I think back to Stu's point, the benefit of podcasting is that it's something for your ears when your eyes are busy. That's the benefit of podcasting. That is our unique selling opportunity that no other medium has. And all of a sudden, we're willing to throw that away for a slightly higher CPM in terms of a video ad. It's crazy, I tell you.
Well, this is why we do this program. And James, thank you for giving your unvarnished thoughts. And I don't think anybody's going to really challenge your thinking here, but I think we're all curious to see how it plays out. And as far as podcasters, creators, I forgot why we can't say influencers anymore, but apparently that's not cool. But
no, it's not.
I like podcasts, honestly. Speaking of Stu,
yes,
I understand there's something called Echoes of Influence.
There is. It's a serious report. I totally can. Yeah. Okay. Well, and I think podcast is RSS. So that's my 2 cents on that. And I like shows. I think call it a show. Call it a show, I tell you, but it doesn't matter what you want to call something. It still works the same way. I kind of feel like it's much ado about nothing. It's another report that's going, hey, this stuff's really cool. It's a great example. It is, let me zoom out here. SiriusXM Media, I downloaded the report. Podcast Trends Reports, and the title is Creators at the Core. So these people must all be talking to each other, kind of like the news stories when they're all using the same words. So everybody's liking creators right now, probably because podcast feels too limited. I think it's pretty obvious. But TLDR on this is podcast work, more diversity, which is good amongst the people that are making shows. Bingeable content is something people like to do. I didn't know if you guys knew that people like to binge. Human beings like to binge. There's a feedback loop thanks to the thing called the internet with social media. I guess the one part that's kind of cool that you're seeing more of at a higher level is the collaboration bit. And this is something you also see in the fan fiction world, but with podcasts where they are engaging with their listeners and putting this into their program. But again, much ado about nothing.
Sounds like we should cut this story.
Well, no, I think it's important because it's important to watch out when you see something like this and really think through it. Like when you get the next big report from a network or like this, it's like, hey, download it, take a look, but think. It's like the number one thing is performance. The number one thing is 3 things. And all of the added bells and whistles are great and all, but fundamentally, it's like what we're talking about. These people have built a relationship with their audience, and primarily the way that is experienced is in audio. Yeah, video's a piece, but all of the social bit or feedback loops or any of that sort of stuff is all nice. That's cool. It's developing, but you can't let your eye get off of the ball, which is the performance at the core of the thing. And like we talk about all the time here at Oxford Road, that comes back to the live read.
Well, and as it says in the report, authenticity wins. Gen Z craves realness.
Yes, they do.
They crave realness, not pitches. Engage through conversation, not commercials, and watch trust and results grow. And on that note, I want to I want to engage you guys in a little conversation here. I want to ask you to close your eyes while we connect on a different level. Okay, I want to
Okay.
use theater of the mind. I want you
Okay,
to
my
tell
eyes are
me
closed.
tell me if you've ever heard of any of these great American companies. Shopify,
Yes.
Bayer, Oracle,
Yes.
Indeed, Masterclass, Babbel, Tommy John, LegalZoom, Constant Contact. We could keep going. Not only do I have the benefit of hosting the Media Roundtable podcast from time to time, I'm also the CEO of Oxford Road and Baritone One, the world's largest collective of specialists in advertising in the whole agency world. We're the largest podcast agency, and we offer comprehensive services that includes media planning and buying, analytics and attribution, insights, things like that. We have a proprietary process you would hear about on our sister podcast, Ad Infinitum, hosted by Stu Redwine. You'd hear about Audiolytics, which is our trademark process for creative and copy generation, and allows us to score commercials for persuasiveness. Beat that. Audio isn't just our work, it's our passion, and we aim to elevate this industry to new heights. That's why we're leading in brand safety and suitability, providing solutions that ensure your placements align your brand values with your business objectives. If you're a chief audio officer and you're seeking best in market performance at maximum viable scale, get in touch with us. You can go to oxfordroad.com, you can go to Veritone One. Either way, all roads lead to success. If you're passionate about audio, strategic, relentless, and looking for a career change, think about joining our mission and being an agent of influence. Send us your resume through the website as well. And if you're serious about the audio industry, go to oxfordroad.com. We made it easy for you to spell. Sign up for our free newsletter. It's called The Influencer. And you'll never miss out on a big topic we cover on this podcast. Be sure to mention that you heard about us on the Media Roundtable podcast. And I thank you for closing your eyes and listening to really get the full experience of that. Now, while we're on this topic, I'm going to just tell you guys about a little research about podcasting, right? Which is a new form of creator-based media. That really focuses on the sound aspect. Signal Hill Insight says that the research should be global too, because we know that global is a big thing. It's one of the fastest growing parts of what we do is pursuing the international expansion. And podcasting, just to summarize here, is inherently global due to its open RSS-based ecosystem. So it allows content to cross borders effortlessly. However, international podcast markets differ significantly, even among shared languages, influenced by local, cultural, and socioeconomic factors. The U.S., with its large market and revenue opportunities, often dominates in the research, leading to generalizations that overlook regional nuances. James, I'm teeing you up for a reaction here to see if any of this connects. For instance, while YouTube is the leading podcast platform in the U.S., Spotify is dominant in Australia, underscoring the need for localized strategies. So Signal Hill basically put out a thing flagging that it's time to stop over centralizing how we talk about this industry, not just in terms of what nouns we use, but also in terms of, trying to think of all markets being treated equal. It turns out there are other countries outside of America, as I've been informed. They may see things in different ways. And in fact, there are some people who believe that there are more people that live outside of America than in America. And they may even have more money collectively to spend through purchasing decisions on things beyond just enhancements to their Spotify subscription. So I don't know. What do you guys think? Let me start with the guy that isn't local here. James, does this connect with you? Do you think we need research from other places?
Oh yeah. I think
This has to be a real problem for you, actually. Like I imagine
Yeah.
this one really hits home.
Yeah, so I've done a bunch of different pieces of work around the differences between the podcast market in Singapore versus the US. Astonishingly, is very different. Who'd have thought it? An email came in from somebody that both that all of you will know, but it was a personal email, so I should possibly not say who it was. But anyway, they say an interesting topic I find is that when looking at the podcast advertiser landscape outside of the US, it's so much more blue chip brand heavy. compared to the US, which is dominated by performance advertisers. US brands have a lot to learn about real marketing and going with your gut versus getting too caught up with measurement methodology and brand safety. And this is somebody that's coming here over the next couple of weeks. So I think that, when you look at different markets, there is so much to learn, particularly European audio industries. You look at what individual podcast markets are doing in Europe. There is a tremendous amount to learn, yet all of the research that we have really is from the US, with the exception of a few Triton rankers from some places. And I think there is a real opportunity being missed here of actually learning what's going on, what is working and what isn't working in some of those other countries as well.
It's time. It's absolutely time. And, it's interesting. I was just chatting the other day with Connor Doyle, who's a big part of our new entity, but a leader at Veritone One. And he was making that exact point that if you look overseas at the type of advertisers, you see just blue chip after blue chip. And then you come to America and everybody's a little freaked out. You just don't see the same concentration, even though big brands are starting to become the top spenders. It's not as fast as you think, and some of the international groups are taking to it. Do you or does anybody have a theory as to why the blue chips are less fearful or slow to adopt in other countries than they might be here?
I mean, my first thought is it must just be a carryover on the measurement piece, that the measurement isn't super critical. I think audio functions very different in different countries.
Okay.
In the UK, for instance, our background is just so inherently advertiser driven. So I would just think they're porting over strategy from radio, and so it's more of a brand play, and that's why you see
That's
that.
interesting. So in America, where everything is like sham,
We're making
all
it
day
work.
long, like
Yeah.
we need 60 seconds to hard pitch this
It has
stuff.
to work. Yeah.
And in other territories, it's
They're
a little
going,
more.
there's other ways to
I
measure.
believe in the
how
art
it
of
works.
suggestion, perhaps
Yeah,
a little bit more.
yeah,
I don't know,
exactly.
James. What's your take?
I don't know. I think you're being slightly slightly rude here about it. No, I mean nobody's going to spend money. Nobody's going to spend money that is a waste of time. Nobody's going to end up doing that. But I do think when you look at some of the markets overseas, you see that there is a lot of radio still in the podcasting world. So here in Australia, for example, the two big players in podcast advertising are ARN, who own the iHeart brand here, and SCA. And of course, what they'll be doing is they will be selling to the existing brands that they have for their radio stations, who, let's face it, are still reaching far more people. And selling podcasting as an add-on there, as well as, obviously attracting new advertisers into podcasting that they are then upselling into the radio world. So I suspect that that has something to do with it. The UK is a fascinating market in that 50% of radio is commercial free in the UK because it's paid for by your television license fee. And so therefore that has an impact on advertising, that has an impact on what people expect in terms of ad load, because obviously you can't combat a ad-free radio station with one that is running 20 minutes of ads an hour. That simply won't work. And so therefore ad load is much lower, yield is much better and more managed in the UK, and so on. And there are these different things in every single country. One of the things I would say is at Podnews, we did a whole set of articles on podcasting in Asia about a year and a half ago. And there were some fascinating things in there. Like, for example, in Vietnam, podcasting does incredibly well, but nobody listens to the podcasts in a car or while traveling. And so we looked into that a little bit further. And the reason for that is they are trying to stay alive. because they're mostly driving little sort of, motorbikes and stuff. And it's incredibly stressful while you're driving in Vietnam. And so therefore nobody's putting on, a podcast just to relax as they drive. It's a matter of life and death, And so it's those individual things from individual countries that I find fascinating and that really help you understand the differences of the podcast market in those different countries.
Hey, and James, I just want to clarify. I know that could have come off a certain way. I think what I'm really trying to say is like, get with it, dummy, to the American marketers. And that I think like Les Binet and Peter feels along in the short of it, that internationally there seems to be a greater understanding that of course brand advertising pays off. Of course, and they've done the work and the homework to prove it. And here there's more of a struggle of like, no, I got to show it worked like right now, like today, like right now. And it's like, well, no. And so if you have that philosophical belief, then of course you're going to increase investment in audio because you're like, well, yeah, that's how audio works. Audio works over a great span of time. Oh, there's this new way to do audio. Oh, cool. Yeah, let's do that. So that's more the place that's coming from.
I do want to unpack this more later, though, because I also want to just better understand, like, what are the brand safety implications, and and are there nuances that would prohibit more of the direct response folks? Would it be less appealing if their time horizon on when they need to see responses like this versus a brand that's got a longer period to measure through, so you don't have to force in all the reminders to act now and all that? That can really be impacted. Or the specs of what type of ads are served in different markets can really impact the type of advertiser that you bring in. So I'd love to learn more about that. And I know some folks that are on our team are actually expert at this. They just don't happen to be on the pod right now. Spencer and Ricardo are holding out. Apparently not. Let's go to our final story, shall we? Ricardo, we're giving you the first word and the last word for yourself to present here. So tell us what's happening.
There's a couple of things. Well, first of all, a report was just released that is makes my life harder every single day because I feel like it releases all of like the insights and all of our secret tricks that we use or that we've learned through all of our experience. And that is the Podscribe performance report that comes out quarterly. And they just released some interesting stats. That's basically that nearly all podcast advertisers are reaching just a quarter of listeners. So, out of the huge volume of listeners, 125 million monthly, we're just capturing a fraction of it. So that was a little bit shocking. But I think the other thing that this report really underscored was some of the things that we've seen in our own work, and that's that podcast really works. They showed about a 44% increase in lift for brands that advertise on podcasts and a 23% increase in lift for brands that advertise on streaming. We know these channels are impactful.
Streaming music.
Yeah, and the data is proving it. I think the other thing that's interesting about this report is it underscores again the impact of having host-read ads, having ads be early in the podcast. So I would say Dan is some positive feedback or constructive feedback. Our ad should probably be a little bit closer to the top of the spot versus in the middle, based on what this report is saying. And then the other thing that's really interesting is in terms of the lift that's expected for brands. And to some extent, this is kind of counterintuitive. The smaller the brand is, the bigger the impact of that podcast advertising. So for brands that have lower monthly unique visitors, it's going to be a significant impact, almost 62% for brands that have under 1 million unique visitors to their website per month. Whereas brands that are larger, these mega brands that have over 20 million visitors per month, they still see a very positive impact of about 16% on average. So really impactful regardless of the size of your business and where your business is. So audio works. I think this report underscores that.
Well, one of the things that that jumps out to me is just the first piece of it saying that you really only reach a small portion of the audience with the top shows, because I promise I have seen in the last 6 months very contrary research. I don't know if it was Edison or what, but it was basically something like you're going to reach half of the total addressable universe of audience in the top 50 shows. And it was like 80% in the top 100 to 200. And I don't hold me to those precisely, but that was the spirit of what I read. So I'm seeing very divergent data come out of this report. And so I don't know if you guys have a thought on it. I'd love to get Pete or Amelia to come and corroborate that, because very, very new information, if true, and very different than what's been reported to date. And I know that's just one of the aspects here. Not surprised to hear that earlier works better. Not surprised to hear that live reads work better, although we know that the premium you pay, it can become a game of arbitrage with the produced ads. So those are my initial reactions. Any other
Yeah, I mean,
reactions?
I would just add to that, Dan, that like my initial gut tells me that, Podscribe is looking at the entire podcast listening universe or audio universe.
Mhm.
And so like most brand, like, you don't need to target my 85-year-old mother-in-law, right?
Mhm,
If you're
mhm.
selling a baby product, probably, or maybe you do. Like, so I think as you get to a more targeted buy, my gut tells me that then your reach and the frequency goes up considerably,
So it's
right?
more like 25, 54. You might be hitting 50% of them with the top 50, but when you really want to look at the whole world, that becomes a different issue. That's interesting.
Yeah, and I think also Ricardo brings up an interesting point, because this comes up a lot, is that like, yeah, you kind of do want to hit the 85-year-old with the baby ad, because I don't know about you guys, but I have friends and family. I'm in an entire network of relationships. So your advertising campaigns, like having the broadest platform possible with with an appealing message that reaches as many people possible, it makes so much sense, because when somebody's making a decision, they aren't making it in isolation, right? And I think that's sometimes the detriment of the advertising industry, is thinking of us as these islands. No one's that way. I've heard it said that no man is an island, no person is an island.
I'll give last word to anyone who wants it, but just to footnote what you said, Stu. We're disciples of Roy H. Williams, the Wizard of Ads, who resides in Austin, Texas, and is kind of an off the grid. He's got a real interesting way of distributing information about how to make audio perform, and he's a radio guy from way, way back that's written a lot of books about this. And his methodology was predicated on the idea that targeting is stupid, and that actually, if you buy cheap enough and you run consistently enough with enough frequency over a long period of time, then your grandmother ends up telling her granddaughter, and like you benefit from the whole cume. This idea that nobody exists unless they're Gen Z is actually not the real way to win in advertising. Now, that's his philosophy, and he's built a successful business around it, but it would ladder to the point that you were making.
I mean, I think the ad buy cheap enough was the key, the key line there, right?
That's
Because
definitely a
100%.
variable.
That's the other way to say it. CPM. CPM.
There's something to that. I don't know. Spencer, James, final thoughts?
I just thought it was an interesting slide where it said double spot and stacked ads perform worse than low read scores. What's interesting about that to me is that you can do a lot of things right that are traditionally done in the landscape and still technically get a low performance because of something that's out of your control as a marketer or CAO. And that's why it's so important to vet every part of a buy rather than just go with your top pillars of rationale when you're planning and when you're buying. Sometimes, even everything goes according to plan and it still ends up like you'll need to optimize. And it can be a small optimization like this or a bigger one. It really depends.
yeah, well, one of the optimizations we often tap into is trying to get more host read ads versus producer read ads, with the belief that producer ads don't work. And one of the interesting findings of this report is that they actually, if they're priced accurately or appropriately, they're equally efficient. In fact, they found an average CPA of $82 for host read ads versus $83 for producer read ads. So it's all about the pricing.
Turns out, if you buy it, it'll all work if you buy it cheap enough. Just so happens. This podcast is brought to you by Oxford Road, where we want you to succeed in audio and use your influence for good, and to build bridges across differences and preserve fair-minded discussion around the most important topics of our age. Save the live reads, save the audio in podcasting, please. If you're a marketer looking to align your brand values around extraordinary business outcomes, reach out to our agency, Oxford Road. Go to oxfordroad.com, subscribe to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. Give us feedback, info@mediaroundtable.com. Listen to Stu lead ad infinitum. If you really, really care about audio creative, it's the place to be. Thank you to our guests, James Cridland of Podnews Daily and Podcast Biz Journal, Stu Redwine of Ad Infinitum and Oxford Road, Ricardo Martinez and Spencer Semonson, my partners in crime here at Oxford Road. Thank you to Caitlin, Haley, Bianca, Kyle, Ezra, Mary Jane, Everett, Neil, and the team at Podcast One. As always, influence responsibly.